Welcome back, and it's the 9 o'clock hour. It's the KPLR 11.2 hour. We apologize for breaking into the Addams family. Jeffersons will be back in 1 hour, but right now you are watching a live broadcast of the Big 550 KTRS radio with our partnership with KPLR Channel 11. We're on 11.2. You can get that with an HD antenna, and if you have Charter, you can certainly watch us on TV on Channel 187. We are live on the app 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Download the app, one radio station. You can certainly watch us at stltoday.com with our partnership with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Also online at ktrs.com, and you can watch us there, and always 550 on your AM dial. Christine Byers is one of our friends, and she's a reporter for the Post-Dispatch. You cover police. Is that your official? You got to talk right into the microphone. This isn't a typewriter. Your official beat is what? Police, and that's your sort of main beat, right?
Exactly, police and crime.
So you clearly, Ferguson was on everyone's mind last year. You wrote a story the other day, still online, stltoday.com, about the Justice Department did an investigation over how St. Louis handled Ferguson.
Yes, they basically dissected the first 16 days following the shooting and looked at the police response on the part of 4 what they called core agencies, and that would be St. Louis County, St. Louis City, Ferguson, and the Missouri Highway Patrol.
Okay, interesting. And then they did this just as a learning exercise?
Essentially, yes.
Did they release this to the public? Did you get this through some anonymous source? How did you get this?
I did get it through an anonymous source.
Okay, so this hasn't been released to the public yet?
Correct. This report that I got a copy of is essentially a draft of an outline of the first draft. This was the first look at what this so-called after-action report is going to look like that was given to the 4 leaders of the core agencies that were looked at. Right.
You got reactions from some of the main people. We'll get to that in a second. But it's a long story, and it's involved, which is why you're here. You can read the story, and then we can discuss it. But let's talk about the first 4 days, because the first 4 days is kind of important, because that's when St. Louis County and the Ferguson Police Department were kind of on their own, right? I mean, nobody came in to sort of help them. They were on their own to quell the unrest.
They were actually drawing upon numerous municipalities and smaller departments, but St. Louis County was heading up those first 4 days. They were the lead agency.
Right.
And they would call in, of course, assistance from the city, municipalities, the Highway Patrol. So all those agencies were there during their first 4 days, but St. Louis County was the lead agency.
Right. Okay. And then after 4 days, Governor Nixon then called in the Missouri Highway Patrol.
Correct.
And then they were in charge, still using all the same resources, but they were the ones calling the shots.
Correct.
Okay. Let's first talk about the 4 days. Does the report distinguish between the first 4 days and the next 12 days?
The report really does not distinguish that specific.
Okay.
It's paints more broad brush strokes on the response in general, and very seldom actually names of which agency did what.
Right.
And they all had very different responses. I mean, for example, it's not like Ferguson Police has the armored vehicles stashed away in their garage.
Right.
You know what I mean? So there was certainly just more of the broad brush approach.
Let's talk about the positives. Was there any positives? This is a shorter answer than the negatives. Was there anything that the feds said that the police and the officials did right in those days?
No.
They did nothing right. Or this report says they didn't do anything right.
Correct. This report does not talk about any. There was no positive findings
right.
at all in this report. This was a very critical report.
Yeah. Does it acknowledge at all that nobody was shot, nobody was killed, and that the police, for all of the criticism, no one died in the aftermath of the looting and the shootings and the fires?
No.
That's, I mean, to me, that's the biggest story that no one ever reported on.
That is not in this report.
That
no.
wasn't mentioned.
No.
All right, let's get to the long report. Some of the negatives, they say that the police infringed on people's civil rights.
Yes.
They say that the police infringed on people's free speech rights.
Yes.
They say that the police infringed on people's rights to assemble.
Yes.
Did they say that the police infringed on the business owner's right to conduct business?
No.
Oh, that's interesting. Did they say that the motorists' rights were infringed upon trying to get to and from work or to and from school or to and from health care and daycare for their children?
No.
Interesting. Yeah. Take us through some of the other big things that they sort of pointed out in this.
They were highly critical of what many in the police world are referring to as the quote-unquote optics of the response. They were highly critical of the use of canines, as well as officers stationed atop the armored vehicles that were using their rifles and pointing them at the crowds. Chief Belmer explained at one point that they were using their rifle sights as sort of binoculars to kind of monitor the activity, but he has said that in hindsight that didn't look very good.
Right, yeah. Optics was a big part of the conversation at the time. They were also critical of the militarized look of the optics.
Yes, the criticism was that essentially they were donning their riot gear during the daytime when things were not necessarily violent and shots were ringing out and all that. And it was the same look of their response during those heightened times of violence in the evening time.
Yeah. Did they? Now this is important because this was the days right after the Michael Brown shooting. This report, from what I understand, Christine Byers of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, is not the police response after the verdict or
Correct.
the non-verdict.
Correct. This is strictly looking at the first 16 days following the shooting and the police response of these 4 particular agencies.
Gotcha. He was referred to as Chief Hug It Out. The man who was in charge of the police after Governor Nixon put the patrol in place. Is he criticized in this because he supposedly changed the whole structure of it when he took over? Was he praised at all for anything he did in the time he was in charge?
No.
Interesting. What are the recommendations in this? Do they have any?
They do. There are a lot of, under each finding, so to speak, there are several recommendations for improvement. Some of them include basically making a more obvious and streamlined way that citizens can file complaints as well as compliments during these times. Because part of the problem on the scene was there were so many different agencies responding that people really were confused and didn't know where to go to file either a complaint or a compliment because you just didn't know what department an officer was from. They quoted it as more than 50 jurisdictions responded to handle the unrest. And so that was one of the recommendations. Another one was to strictly prohibit the use of canines for crowd control. And ban the practice of having a sniper positioned atop an armored vehicle. There were those sorts of things,
Right.
as well as recommendations to streamline the command structure, because I guess there was a lot of internal communication problems that they found among all of the agencies.
Yeah. What did they say about the city of St. Louis and their response?
They honestly, in this draft outline,
Right.
they very seldom named names of individual agencies. But at one point they talked about one agency did not have canines on the scene,
Right.
but they didn't name that agency. And it's my understanding that was St. Louis City that did not send canines to the response.
The police used, as they say, some say rubber bullets, police say pellets and pepper bullets and things like that. Did the report touch on that at all?
It did, and it said it faulted the police basically because it said that when reports were inaccurately suggesting that they were using rubber bullets, that the police really did not do anything to correct those false reports.
Wow. That's interesting because the police tried to yell it from the mountaintop and were shouted down. The police came on this radio show numerous times and said, we're not doing that. Chief Belmer held a news conference and said that exact same thing, didn't he? I mean, you were there. You covered this stuff.
As far as I know, yes.
Right. Gabe Crocker came on the show numerous times and kept saying it. I would say, hey, they keep saying they're not using these things. And then I was called a racist for toting the police line. Now the Justice Department in this preliminary report says the police didn't do enough to dispel the false allegation.
Correct. The report is also very highly critical of the police for not talking with the media more and getting out accurate information early on regarding the shooting itself.
Yeah, here's what you write in your story about this report. Had law enforcement released information on the officer-involved shooting in a timely manner and continued the information flow as it became available, community distrust and media skepticism would most likely have been lessened. You are not the opinion person, so I'm not going to ask you your opinion. But my recollection of it is that the police, there's reasons why you can say things about a shooting, and there are reasons why you can't. You have to gather all the information. It was a hectic day. There was gunshots firing over top. They released the information. When they released the information, it is what it is. I won't ask you your opinion because you're not an opinion person. Not that you don't have your opinions, but you're the reporter in this role. You just write the facts. When do we think this report will be released to the public?
That's sort of in flux right now. The last conversation with the Department of Justice COPS office, as they're known, that's heading up this report. The last conversation on that issue was last week with all four of the leaders of these core agencies. And at that point, they were told to expect an in-person meeting sometime later this week with Department of Justice officials here, COPS office officials here, to go over the report. And so the thought, at least last week, was that they would get a look at the final draft potentially this week, and then they were going to be given a certain period of time in which the final report would be released to the public, and that's sort of in flux right now. But
I'm sorry. Does anywhere in this report critical of the Attorney General who came to Missouri and said, we want justice for Michael Brown, putting his hand or his foot on the scales of justice? Is it critical of that?
There is no criticism of politicians or anyone outside of the police.
Interesting. Christine Byers, ladies and gentlemen, great job as always. STLtoday.com. It's up and it's out. Great job. We'll let you get back to work. Thanks.
Thanks, McGraw.
You got it. Christine Byers, 314-969-KTRS, 1-888-550-KTRS, or star KTRS. The Justice Department says Ferguson did nothing right. Ferguson Police, the St. Louis County Police, the State Patrol did nothing correct in the Ferguson protests response. We'll come back, and since she can't give you her opinion, I'll give you my opinion. We'll do that next on KTRS.